Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bytes with your host, Doug Truitt, Head of Revenue Success at Reynolds United,
Hey guys.
and myself, John deRoulet, Revenue Management Expert at Wheelhouse, where we'll be having 20 to 30-minute conversations about revenue and distribution topics in the vacation rental spaces. Welcome to our 8th episode. Quite a lot. Doug, what are we talking about today?
Dude, we are talking about Parity Police. So is it real or is it misplaced threat? A lot of you folks have probably seen out there some news from Airbnb. A lot of different folks are talking about it, that they're coming out with a parity type setup. Some of you may remember or know of Booking.com and Expedia's parity kind of setup, or rate parity agreements and setups they do, where they scrape other sites to find your rates for the same properties and kind of try to hold people accountable to just making sure they're advertising the same rates. So anyways, we're going to be talking about it because it's definitely a hot topic in the space right now. People are talking about it now that Airbnb has gotten into the rate parity game, or trying to. So we felt it was really important to talk about it and talk about our experiences with it, because we battled it quite heavily with Booking and Expedia, but also just kind of get people prepared and know what to come and how to combat it.
Yeah, and so we'll follow the format we followed last time. We'll give you right off the bat some kind of recommendations and thoughts, and then we'll dig in a little deeper into what rate parity is, where the history of it is, how it's traditionally existed within the hospitality space, and then how it might be affecting us as we start to see more movements in that direction. So Doug, why don't you explain to us what rate parity is real quick for those who maybe don't know?
Yeah. So a lot of times, historically, what it's been is when you do your T&Cs, your terms and conditions, when you sign a contract with, say, Booking.com or Expedia or any channel, there's in the fine print somewhere in these contracts that actually says that you're going to maintain rate parity basically across other advertisement channels. Even I think even some of those agreements say something like including your own direct website. Basically, they try to globalize the rate that you set with their channel, that you're doing it on all the channels, so that they can just basically be given the fair chance to convert the same as other channels do. So that's kind of what rate parity is, if you don't know about it. And it is kind of buried in some of the T&Cs and terms and conditions. And then, it really has not ever been something that has been like, a big giant wall that you can't get around, or that you can't, just kind of keep doing what you need to do. The channel basically will just try to hold you accountable for that in various ways. And so Booking and Expedia would do it in forms of like downplaying your search results for your properties in the search in the algorithm of what returns, to try and slow your conversion down because you're not playing nicely and whatever for them. So that's kind of what rate parity is and where it has been. And I'm excited for us to talk about kind of where I think it's going. You want to kind of get into just kind of some of the things that we're going to recommend off the top?
Yeah, why don't you start, Doug? I think that's a
Okay.
pretty good description of rate parity, and we'll be digging into a little bit more about the specifics of how that's come about, how it's being done, and that sort of thing.
Sure. So, in the spirit of what we're trying to do with the new format and trying to give you guys some recommendations right off the bat, and save some time for you that may not want to necessarily hear all of the details and the things we have, some of the recommendations that John and I have. So, from my side, I would say that don't let the parity police, so to speak, change your rate strategy until you can visibly see that you're really falling behind in your search results or your conversion, right? I mean, if they come out and say, hey, you're violating things or doing whatever, go and do the research and find out what's going on, right? Booking and Expedia have impression tools, and they have view tools and conversion tools for you to look at, and I think some of the other channels do as well. So you can look at those things to see if it's changed over time for your property or your listing, and just be able to understand it. The next thing I would say of my 3 recommendations would be devise a strategy that doesn't compromise your rate positioning from your top channel producer. And what I mean by that is, if Airbnb is generating majority of your bookings, and all of a sudden now they're wanting rate parity and they want all these things, and for whatever reason they think that by you having a lower rate on Booking.com versus what's on Airbnb, maybe don't compromise dropping the rate. Because if you feel that your production is good and you're getting a lot of bookings and you're not slowing those bookings from Airbnb, and you're getting a premium rate that's maybe higher or something, why change that if it doesn't really make any sense? All that does for Airbnb is maybe gives them more market share of your business, which maybe you don't really want to do because you're already giving them a lot. Then the last thing I would say is, if you are receiving any of these nasty grams or what I call nasty grams from these channels, or they say you're in rate parity violation or something, don't just take it for what it is. Do the research, find out if it's true. And you can do this with you can do two things with this. One, you can just validate and see that it's real. If they're going to tell you, I think Booking or Expedia will tell you where they observed it, where they observed the rate, what it was different, and that kind of thing, or the availability was different. And then the second part would be is help you help find the mistakes in the rate markups, basically that you don't have, that you didn't know about, right? So utilize this as something to say, hey, maybe I didn't realize that I was cutting down Booking.com by 20%, which was a huge rate difference, or something on Airbnb versus, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you're marking it up too high and you're pricing yourself out of the market on that channel. Maybe something that helps you get your channel mix back in line, where you thought one channel was not performing just because it was doing crappy, when really it was an accidental thumb error on the percentage markup. So those are my three main recommendations for you. John, what do you got?
Yeah, I have a lot of agreement with Doug. I'm going to keep mine pretty simple. The first one I think is just be prepared for this rate parity conversation to start to take up a lot more space in people's consciousness. And honestly, what I would probably advise is that people will probably start talking about it, particularly if Airbnb is the one pushing it. Their account reps will talk about it, but it's probably going to take up more like brain space than actually have effect on your business initially. Rate parity is super complex. It's really hard to enforce. The channels that have done it really well, namely Expedia, one, aren't enforcing it on the vacation rental side, and two, you would think they would be the ones to lead it if they thought it was important. So it's really complex, and the effect on your properties is probably going to be a lot less than the way people are talking about it, at least initially. So don't panic, but be starting to think about how it may affect you. The second one, I think, is the rate parity move is really unusual, in my opinion, from Airbnb. I kind of have an idea of why they think they've done it. And you've probably, if you've been listening to our other episodes, you've heard me say this a couple times, but a rate parity concern is really tied, I think, to a host commission model. I've been talking to professional partners who are already being forced into a host commission model, or partners who are creating new accounts that no longer have the option to not have a host commission model. And shifting that cost to the host, I think, is really tied. They're kind of go hand in hand, right? They're concerned about their competitiveness. One of the things that I think, eventually, all things considered in aggregate, these prices are going to equalize, because for the consumer, they're paying the same amount. But if those go hand in hand, you're going to have to keep in mind how that affects your position and your bottom line, or especially if you have contracts in a way that splits those OTA costs, you're going to have those conversations. So I would definitely be prepared for a broader push on host commission models on these channels that push for rate parity, because otherwise, why would they care, right?
Yeah.
The third one is I think, this kind of goes along with Doug, which is don't let them change your rate strategy, is take advantage of the lack of requirements while you can, and take advantage of the situation where this is really complicated for companies to enforce rate parity. The different companies have done it in different ways. And our space is notoriously fragmented and difficult to match these. So I think what we'll see is they may be able to match your listings to other listings. We may talk about some strategies to kind of get around that. But as long as, there's a lot of ways in our space where it makes it very difficult for them to enforce rate parity, and you can take advantage of that. Particularly, I think, on direct websites and stuff, that's going to be like the last place they're able to enforce any rate parity. And that's going to be a consistent advantage that you can take advantage of. So those would be my takeaways. I think we can kind of just move in. Like, why don't we talk a little bit about like the history, or what rate parity has been in the space, hospitality space in general, on the major channels, what that's kind of looked like for hotel providers, that sort of thing. Doug, I know you came from hotels initially. Maybe you can give us some insight onto that.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, the history of rate parity, I mean, there may not be a lot of people in the audience and that remembers this or knows of this, but in the hotel world, you used to have basically your front desk agents and your front desk staff for the hotel revenue management team. The front desk agents would be tasked and they'd have a little clipboard with a list, and they'd have all their competitive set hotels in the downtown or wherever they're at. And basically they just have a list, and they'd have for the next like 2 nights basically, and mapped onto a sheet. And they basically would just have a phone number for each of the hotels, and they'd call the hotel, just like now the digital version of incognito window. They would do that just by phone, just call from a phone, and nobody would really be knowing what it is, and just be like, hey, I'm just calling to see what your nights are for what's your cheapest rate for that night. And then they would mark it on a clipboard on a paper, and they'd turn that paper into the revenue manager or the front desk manager. Sometimes they had those as a hybrid role, and then they would understand where their rates were at, and then they go and say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to raise the rate this. So now if you compound that on top of all these hotels doing this stuff, right, then you've got everybody that's just kind of stair stepping and raising rates and raising rates and raising rates. And so what the OTAs did is, when they had enough of a market share in the hotels of basically saying we're contributing a lot of your rates, they started seeing that as a problem, because people would just keep calling around, and they would do all these different rates because they were just competing against each other, and they have all these rate wars basically in these little silos in some of these cities. And so the OTAs were like, we got to do rate parity, because we're losing out on market share, because they're doing something to these rates where they're either undercutting or they're going higher, and then we're getting the short end of the stick. And so they started basically trying to enforce rate parity. And that's kind of where I think the history originally started from, was where they started doing that was because of those behaviors that the hotels were doing. And then obviously we know nowadays, new days with the hotels, I think it's, what is it, Marriott and Hilton, their war is to say, I don't need the OTAs at some point, and try to just basically eliminate them and say they get enough direct book that they're fine, or GDS and whatever. So that's kind of where I think the history has been with rate parity. But
there's another component there too, Doug.
Yeah, what's that?
It's also we've done a lot of development over the last 30 years in this space, definitely over the last 10, but it's not just between the hotels, but between the 2 big channels themselves, or between the myriad of channels before they were all consolidated under these brands. There was a time when Expedia didn't own every channel and Priceline didn't own every channel, right?
Yes.
There was a lot of channels, and people didn't always have the technology to even distribute their rates other than in a manual way. So they would just end up different. And if your rate was the one that was higher than everyone else's, you were at a competitive disadvantage. So as Expedia and Booking were competing against each other, they were like, you need to have us, at the very least, have the lowest rate that you're posting that we can track.
Yeah.
And so that's another kind of big component.
You're definitely right. I missed that. I went way back far, that's really where it started. But as soon as the OTA started holding hotels accountable from an individual channel perspective, then they started saying, now we got to do it against also our competitors in the space in the OTAs, like you're saying, which that's where it evolved to. And then it's gotten even crazier than from there. So
there's even another tidbit, which is Expedia and like hotels.com actually used to buy rooms in bulk and then resell them. And so they didn't want people to undercut the rates that they had purchased, because then they couldn't sell them if you could just call the hotel and get a lower rate.
Yeah, I think that was kind of a play with some of the opaque channels too, right? People would say, "Hey, we'll buy up your hotel rooms, and we'll put them opaque and do them until the day that people need to get there." And we're like, "Hey, here, you're staying at the Hojo."
Yeah. Well, let's come back to opaque channels, because they're interesting too, because they're really a response to the methods that were created to enforce rate parity.
Definitely.
But let's hit that. Why don't you keep going, Doug, a little bit more on kind of what, maybe a little bit more specifics on what the channels have done to enforce rate parity.
So yeah, going from what we just talked about, fast forwarding to the, common day with, internet and scraping and things that kind of emerged out of places. I think Expedia was one of the first to actually figure out how to do it and make it happen. But they basically took methodology of scraping sites to basically go and take, hey, I've got property listing, beautiful 1-bedroom, blah, blah, blah. Or I've got, the Marriott hotel. Let's just do it in the context of hotels. I've got the downtown Marriott in Seattle. here on my listing, on my site, and I know that they're selling it for $100 a night on this date. Well, then they go and they look and basically just scrape the other channels. Basically, at the time, it was just they would just scrape Booking.com and Booking.com affiliates like Priceline and I think that was it. But they would basically go and scrape Booking.com and Booking.com subsidiaries, and then say, okay, what did they find for that same property name, same kind of location, same dates, and what was the rates? And they look at two things with rate parity, which I didn't mention that in the beginning when we were talking about it, but rate parity isn't just about rates. It's also about availability. It's if you're available or not. So they would basically take those two pieces, put them together, and see if they equated each other. If they didn't, then they threw up a flag, and then they would send a nasty gram and say, hey, you're out of parity and you're not playing nicely. Now, at the time, they didn't really have, when they first started doing it, they didn't really have a vehicle to hold anybody accountable. It was more of just kind of like a scare tactic, I believe, where it was just kind of like, hey, we know you're doing something, funky, where you're charging cheaper on this other one, or you're not available on ours, but you're available on this other one. So that's kind of how it went. And then it evolved to a place where they started building it into the extranets. Within Expedia, and even Booking.com, got onto it, which was they would actually display to you the individual incident and anomaly and thing that they saw that flagged a problem from a rate parity standpoint. And they'd tell you what the rate was. They'd tell you what the availability was, even minimum length of stay settings they would look at too. And then they would start to basically just say, hey, this is what it is. Now, Expedia started to basically penalize you and kind of give you a slap on the hand, and they would like downplay your visibility, and they would even show you a graph where it was like, hey, we observed it on this date, and now your visibility, now you're down on page like 5 or 6 in the search results because of this. And then they would give you like a grace period of like or not a non-grace period of like 30 days or 20 days or something like that, where you would sit down there kind of not bottom of the barrel, but you'd be penalized. And then you would come back up after that if things were corrected and they didn't find any other issues. So heavy lift, huge data, huge resource software development, huge holes to plug and try to figure out how to make it a really legitimate thing, because you can have it in your terms and conditions that you say there's rate parity or whatever, but holding it accountable is another thing. You have to have really solid proof, and you have to have it backed, and you have to do it. Even if it's just a scare tactic, you still have to, because you jeopardize your brand as a OTA and a platform for people to want to be there. If you get too much of a bad name with it, people aren't going to want to be on there. Maybe they'll just say, hey, I'll pause for a little bit. And there were some hotels that there were some articles back when that literally did that. They're like, I don't like this, so I'm pausing my listings. I'm pausing them for a couple months. I'm saying, proverbially middle finger to you, and I'm not going to do it. So that's an interesting part, but I'll stop there because we probably should get into the other pieces too.
Well, there's an interesting aspect to, I think we should draw a distinction. Expedia has probably been the most diligent about creating a rate parity thing, and they use their own platform to punish you. So if you're not in rate parity and they catch you, one, they tell you exactly where it is. So in order for them to enforce it, they had to be really accurate about telling you. I bring that up, and I'll come back to that in a second. Booking.com takes like a totally different approach. They don't send you anything. They don't tell you anything. Doesn't seem like they care much. They actually, what they do have though, nobody knows this, it seems to me. We've never really had anyone take it on. They have a price match guarantee that you agreed to. So if someone else sees a lower rate and then they call Booking.com, they'll give them the lower rate. Just nobody does it. So Booking.com is like kind of like, they just don't seem to care. But as a consumer, if you see a lower rate somewhere, you can call Booking.com and book through them. If you didn't know that. And you've agreed to it, you can't opt out of it. They're like, we're not going to invest all this money into policing our suppliers. We're just going to offer a better experience, or I don't know what whatever their proposition is, it's not holding that accountability. But Expedia has invested a lot in it, which is partially why I think it's interesting that one, we're talking about this in relation to Airbnb. That's where we're going to come next. I'm not surprised because I've heard from talking to managers that they've been bringing this up. And I kind of said the same things, which is like, look, if you're going to tell me I'm not in parity and you don't know exactly where it is, like, leave me the hell alone. Excuse my language.
No, that's the way everybody feels though. Like
it is, because there's too much data to look at. Right. But it also is surprising to me that they're going to go down this route in our industry when Expedia hasn't, because one, Expedia has the infrastructure to do it. They know how to do it, and they own a vacation rental channel, so they actually can link your listings, which is the most difficult aspect of doing this, is not only telling what, like in our industry, with hotels, everyone's got the same brand. So all you have to do is find their listing. With us, these listings are almost unmoored from branding, and they could all have different content, which is something I think we should hit on in the next segment about what do you do. But it's very hard to match these properties up, and then to make sure that your data is accurate enough that you can, one, catch an issue and also report it in a timely fashion to the person where they can either rectify it or take it seriously. Very interesting to me that Airbnb is going this route. Not too surprised. They're a publicly traded company, and there's probably a lot of people in that boardroom saying we should be more like an OTA, because OTAs make a lot of money. But
I think it's a really interesting piece on that, because it's an integrity play too, right? They've gotten, Airbnb's gotten big enough where they feel like they can test their client base a little bit and actually try to feel like they can, hold the stick over their head, so to speak, with regards to being like, I'm gonna squeeze a little bit more on you because you need me. And that's kind of the part that I think it really rubs a lot of people raw. And I think that's what a lot of people during this COVID timeframe have seen, this shift where tons of their revenue share, or their rev share, has been from Airbnb and not as dispersed as it had been pre-COVID through other channels. And so I think that kind of rubs a lot of people in the space raw, that is like, dude, you're like taking advantage of the situation. That's messed up. Like, that's not cool. Like,
just like OTAs allowed boutique hotels to really start to thrive compared to flags, we've seen a lot of Airbnb entrepreneurs start to thrive, and Airbnb sees that, there's probably a similar approach there, which is there is leverage over your portfolio if you don't have diversification of channels. And we'll see how that goes. But let's shift a little bit. Let's talk about Doug, what do you think this is like? Because we're talking about Airbnb. Who did that article, and what was the name of the article that came out? That was real good. We'll link it when we post this on LinkedIn.
Thibault Mason. I apologize, Thibault, if I'm saying your name wrong, but it was an article that you put on LinkedIn that I thought was really, really good. And he has an in-depth thing. We'll have to put a reference to that link in there on the post.
Really, really good. And it doesn't surprise me, because about a year ago, I had a conversation with a market rep who, in my opinion, didn't really know what they were talking about, but they were talking to us about parity, and I just thought it was the most ridiculous conversation ever, because they were telling us that the rate was lower on Booking.com, which I don't think it was, first of all. But second, we had never made a booking on our Booking.com thing, and we were selling at a higher rate on Airbnb, doing like 90% occupancy. I was like, why are you complaining to us?
What's the problem? I don't get it.
Yeah. But what do you think how does this do? Like, I think Airbnb is in a tough position with rate parity right now, because I think they see that they want to compete with these other channels. That's going to shift people towards the host commission model, which is reasonable, but they still have the problem of this variable cost model. And they get rid of that with the host commission model. But if people aren't on a host commission model and they have a variable traveler cost, there's no way you can calculate your end cost to the guest. So if they're telling people to do something, people are like, well, I have no idea. Like, I'm distributing the same rate. I don't know if the end price is the same. What am I supposed to do? And that's honestly, like, it's partly why I've said that these are coupled, right? Because you can't enforce rate parity if you have a variable cost on top.
No, that is probably one of the biggest aha moments or points with all of this, that everybody should really take into context with the rate parity and what they're coming out with. I look at Airbnb's announcement about rate parity and what they're going to potentially do as just talk. I just think it's just noise. I don't think that there's really an infrastructure to actually really hold it accountable, because let's be honest, people in our space, in the vacation rental space, are going to fight tooth and nail against Airbnb or anybody who tries to hold them accountable for something, when it's going to be like, okay, well, your service fee is this, your this is this, all these taxes, fees, all these other things. And then you want to show me that against this other thing. And you're like, wait a second, that's not my problem. Like, I don't care that my individual nightly rate is a hair lower over here or whatever, you're charging an extra percentage on top of it to the guest for X, Y, and Z. And like, there's just not going to be, there's not going to be a way right now. And I agree with you. I think that it, maybe it's a precursor to the host commission model, because once it goes to host commission model, then it should be a little bit more in line with the rest of the channels, with the exception of Vrbo. Vrbo's at a 5% deal or whatever, but it'll go more in line with like Booking and Expedia if they go that route to the host commission, and then they could do it. So I mean, it is something that they could try to do, but they've got a long ways to go before they get to that point. So it seems like this is maybe a ploy to continue to almost hold people accountable by words, just to get them to keep their, integrity with keeping all their stuff on Airbnb or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's any real tangible way for them to make this thing work right now, while there's still the variable costs, like you said, looming out there.
Not just variable cost, but they're not remitting every tax. So people have to put that into their rate, which creates, I mean, those calculations are complex. So again,
and they're also not doing the most accurate tax too either. For some operators have different taxes that they have to pay in certain markets because of the size of their property physical address versus others, and other aspects. Like it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of bold that they did this, honestly.
I think you're right. I think what they're doing is testing the waters, but I think that people don't really have to be that concerned yet, because when Expedia bought VRBO, they talked about switching the model and doing some of these things that they brought from the hotel world. That failed. It's been years, and they never have really, like, Expedia actually has the capability to do rate parity, and they barely have gotten their 5% commission through after 4 years?
Yeah.
These things are complex, and I imagine that there's a bunch of people in the boardroom who come from the OTA world, who think that that's all they have. This is all they have to do, and they'll raise their profits. And they're kind of not realizing how fragmented it is. And that doesn't go into how complex our space is because of the way we do listings, right? And this goes into a strategy for rate parity. I think what we'll see, we've talked about this a little bit in terms of marketing strategies, about being able to actually build different content for your listings and target specific segments. But that also becomes a very interesting quality of your listings, which is if you have different content or different titles on your listings, or we know some companies that have individual Airbnb listings than room type level Airbnb or Booking.com listings, we're making it exceptionally hard for them to match what the like product is. Now, what we don't know is if the PMS direct connections are feeding them all that information. I do remember seeing when HomeAway was trying to make all these changes on their API like years ago, and there was a whole big uproar because part of their API specs is they took the listing IDs of all of the other listings. I don't think that ended up going through. We'd have to ask someone at like Streamline or something, but that's what VRBO is trying to do. They're like, oh, we have these people connecting through the PMS. We'll just get all of the other listings so that we can match them up.
Yeah.
Ended up being more difficult.
That was like not
Who knows if Airbnb's got that relationship with people, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to match listings up in our space, and we can make it even harder than it is. Easily.
Well, I think on top, easily. But I think also on top of it, I mean, a lot of clients that I advise, kind of goes in the opposite direction of that, as far as, making it harder for people to understand if it's the same. Like I tell people to use same listing titles. I tell them to use like, as much branding as you possibly can in the listings so you can do it. So I know that people may be saying, oh, well, Doug, but that's going to be an identifier for Airbnb to say, oh, that's the same property as this one or whatever. But the reality you have to think about is, put yourself in Chesky's shoes or whoever at Airbnb who's sitting way on the top. And I mean, how many listings does Airbnb have over the world? Like, I don't know, 6-7 million or something like that. Something, I don't even know how many, but it's a huge number of listings. So think about it from that perspective, that my one property or my series of 50 properties, because remember, majority of the industry in the vacation rental space is still kind of SMB, which is that, somewhere between 5 properties to 50 properties, right? There's large enterprise clients out there, but I guess the point that I'm trying to drive at is that other than latitude, longitude, and content description and maybe branding on the host profile or something for the listing, there isn't a whole lot that's like quick and easy way in data for that many listings, that many things to actually see, hey, this is the same thing as that thing. And what's the ROI to Airbnb or any OTA to go that deep on it to make that happen? There really isn't. There's no way there can be that much ROI from them unless they figured out some AI machine learning thing that would automate the thing that just kind of is a nasty gram that throws it out there like Expedia did, or maybe even like what Booking did, where it was like, I'm not wasting my time on this. I'm going to tell you about it. See if you react to it. If you don't react to it, is what it is. I have a price match guarantee or something like that. So people got to really, really think about the logistics of how they can actually enforce this to make it profitable for Airbnb. And that's where I think a lot of my intuition comes from. This is just a scare tactic in some ways, because I don't know that they can really do this tangibly for the long term without some kind of automation.
Well, and on top of that too, they're also dealing with the fact that, we've heard all year that they have a supply crunch. So
yep. Yeah, what does that do to that?
If the biggest lever that they have is, which Expedia can do very well against a hotel, because there's a lot of similarly chain scaled hotels near you usually. And so if you're like a Hilton Garden Inn and they're going to drop you to the third page, that's going to hurt you. But if you're looking on Airbnb and Airbnb has a supply crunch and they're going to tell you that they're going to drop your ranking, if you're the top property, people are going to see you. And if you're the only available property, people are going to see you. And so it kind of just supports the idea that even though rate parity may become a conversation from Airbnb, I really don't think people should do anything different right now.
Yep. So let's talk about, let's do one point from you and 1 point from me, but what would you say is the top way around rate parity? Say it does happen and it becomes a real threat, worst case scenario, right? What would be your way around it?
I think where we'll see if it really does become a bigger thing in our space is that we'll see in our space, which I think would be good overall for a number of operational reasons as well, but website providers will start to create logins. One, you can access your reservation information, you communicate with people, log your stuff. It's good for everyone from a customer 365 view, but also you can offer a rate behind a wall.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You can offer a member rate, and that's what the hotels do. And I think our industry needs to do that overall. Like websites should all have a login so that you can access your information. We all have apps now, or a lot of us have apps. Like they should all be linked up. I think we're going that way anyway. There's a revenue management aspect to that as well, and marketing aspect that I think just goes along with.
It's probably a safer, more secure thing too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, having the username credential with a forgot password if you need it and all that other stuff just to do certain things, it might be better. I mean, everybody's used to it now.
Yeah, and then you can log all your communication and requests and stuff with people. I think we should have a broader conversation about that long term. It was something to really push for more of it. Stay Alfred, but I think it'll also contribute to the rate parity thing, because now you can do marketing and sales and rate efforts through that, and we'll see how the infrastructure gets built. What about you, Doug?
That you kind of were starting to get to it, but that was my number one thing that you can do right now as a property manager, whether you're small or big. Do a loyalty program. I know that there's a few companies and services that are out there that you can actually jump on that will actually kind of route with your system or whatever and help you create like a point reward system. I know that like credit card processors even has some of like the squares and all those other things. I mean, there's some resources out there that you could utilize to do it if you don't want to build out the huge software development infrastructure to do it. I know that some of the PMSs with their third party, websites like BizCore and stuff like that, they have the ability for those higher end versions to actually include like a loyalty or a guest portal type thing. And you could actually turn that into a loyalty program. And that's probably one of the most effective ways to protect your direct site bookings, where you get your most margin off of, to keep those protected, with also your OTAs, keeping those up and going for the marketing that brings all that traffic in, is create a loyalty program where somebody logs in, signs up for it. And it's also a way that you can do your post-marketing game as well. When somebody stays with you, you can send them out and say, hey, sign up for our newsletter, become a loyalty member. And when you do that, then you can start having an audience. You can start sending, 10% off discounts or 20% off discounts or whatever you want to do to offset OTA commissions and get a direct booking where you don't have to pay anything or deal with weird, stuff that the OTAs do that you don't like. So I think that's my number one way right there would be is create a loyalty program to protect, your house, so to speak, on your direct sites. Along with that, I would say that ties to that is don't let any rep or any email scare you from an OTA where they say, well, I saw on booking.com, you had a Genius 10% discount. That's only for Genius members. So in the spirit of loyalty programs, each channel may have its own loyalty program where you could have created promotions or been a part of preferred partner or something like that. And those customers get that, but that is not technically a public facing rate. That is only if somebody is actually within that. So make sure that if you have a rep or somebody you two talk to and they come to you and say, hey, you're not blah, 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 kind of almost like what you were saying, John, with the guy that kind of came to you and be like, well, okay, if you're telling me that I'm cheaper on this channel because that like I have to be a member, somebody has to be a member of that and they have to elect and sign up for it to get that rate. That's not illegal based under rate parity agreements. And they'll play those nasty little games sometimes to try and get you to, do stuff so that their numbers as sales reps or whatever will go higher.
Well, and on top of that, just push back on the specifics. Like, don't let reps talk to you about generalities.
Yeah.
You need specifics because it's a very real problem, because the answer to them is what dates and when did you see it and what did you see and what channels, because they need to provide that information if they're going to enforce anything. But two, there's a real reason other than just being combative, which is these Airbnb reps think they invented the industry. They don't realize how complex the tech stacks are. And it's like something could be broken.
Yeah. And that's where they should probably focus it too. If I were a rep, I'd be like, hey, look, I see this thing's out of whack and rate parity. Is there something going on? Like maybe there's a markup or something you have that's off or whatever. And, that's where I would come at it as an approach to be like working with my client. And I wouldn't want to be one of those reps that are just like, you're out of tolerance. You need to fix it or else we're going to penalize you, So
I think that you can push back though, and really just push back and ask, like, what are the specifics and how is this affecting me? Particularly if you're generating, like if that's your workhorse channel and you tell them that, it's like, look, I'm doing most of my revenue through you. Why are you hassling me about this?
Yeah.
Like, do you want me to shift my revenue to another channel?
Yeah. Do you want me to just go there? I will.
Like, we're charging a higher rate through you. What's your problem?
Well, cool. Well, in the tradition, because we're running about time here, let's do the joke KPI, and I'm excited for this one. What was the joke KPI? I think this is great.
All right, our joke KPI today is called lunch diff, and that's the average number of minutes that the optimal lunchtime is missed due to 30-minute meetings lasting 47 minutes throughout the month. This is a KPI that you can use to benchmark and determine if you know the lunch diff of your CEO, you can use that to determine when you should ask for time off or when you need more departmental resources or that kind of thing. Because like a low lunch diff, closest to zero, the best, maybe even a little positive, although you really want to be close to zero because people eat lunch too early, later in the day, they're grumpy. It allows you to really get the things you need. And if you know that there's like a really high lunch diff, people are really busy, maybe you got to find another time to ask for stuff.
I think it's funny on the inverse side too. You could plan out your CEO meetings like with your CEO in it and be like, oh, well, it's going to run 15 minutes usually over. Okay, we're going to start 15 minutes early. That's funny.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's a good barometer for how late your meetings are running.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, cool.
Well,
so why don't you tell a little about yourself and then I'll tell about myself and then we can wrap it up.
Awesome. Well, my name is John deRoulet, and I'm the head of enterprise sales and resident revenue management expert at Wheelhouse. We're a dynamic pricing software with the best algorithm in the space, the only ones with a true booking-based algorithm, basically powered by our partner Key Data now, which is really awesome. So if you're looking for dynamic pricing and revenue management platform, we're the people to talk to.
That's awesome. My name is Doug Truitt, Head of Revenue Success at Rentals United. Goal is to try and develop more transparency with our clients and help them with their connectivity and channel management that we do as a trade, but give them some more insights and show them their data and have them be able to get more time back and focus on what matters. So,
what's the name of your product, Doug?
Data Studio. Are you Data Studio? It's real original.
It's
but yeah,
really awesome. If you guys don't know, it's super cool. And if you're already a Rentals United user, you actually get like a big portion of it for free. So you should all reach out to Doug and flood his email.
Definitely. And coming soon here in the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to release our Booking.com reviews tool, where we're actually connected to the Booking.com review API. Bring in all your reviews, and we actually have hot links for you to respond to the reviews without having to go into the extranet. So some cool stuff coming.
Rock on. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Cheers.